Moving from atonement to grace, the third of Simon's questions is the concept of the grace of God similar between Christianity and Islam? Dr. Saab, perhaps you could...
Yes, I think grace of God, if we understand it to be a gift from God, it is unearned or unmerited merit or a favor of God. So it is something that is totally undeserving, and it impacts on the undeserving nature of the recipient and the generous nature of the giver. So in that wider concept, the grace of God is something that envelops everything around us. Islam does in fact talk about the attributes of Allah in very much greater detail, and the promised Messiah alayhi salam has shed light on this and has said that there are 4 main attributes of Allah called the mother of all attributes, and from them emanate all the different attributes of Allah. And from these attributes we also understand God's grace, and His grace encompassing different matters. His graciousness or Rahmaniyat is similar to the concept of the grace of God in this respect, that He gives without asking. There are millions of things that Allah bestows upon His creation without Him ever asking. For instance, the air we breathe, we never ask for that. And certainly other things that we do in our day-to-day life without asking. But Islam and the attributes of Allah go one step further in that God's grace also encompasses merits for deeds that you do. So this is an important distinction that we should also understand from the subject of grace of God, that there are other things that we earn by doing whatever God has commanded us to do, and trying in His way to obtain these.
I think this point just Dr. Saab has mentioned is very valid point, very conclusively mentioned there, that there are so many blessings of Allah Almighty which we receive, all of us, even Muslims and non-Muslims also receive that without asking for those things. Another aspect of that is without any effort doing for that.
Yes.
Without any effort on their part, Allah Almighty is gracious because He is Rahman. That is one of His attribute out of those attributes. So these 2 attributes indicate Rahman and Rahim, the mercy of Allah Almighty. Rahman means He gives without asking and without any effort on the part of the people. Out of His own graciousness, God Almighty provides, just like the milk, for example. When the child comes into this life, maybe the birth takes place in a desert. Allah Almighty has made the arrangement within the body of the mother that the newborn baby is immediately able to have the milk. So this is one example of the gracious God. And on the other side, there are things for which people have to strive. So Allah Almighty, through these attributes, neither leaves the people inactive, that they should just sit idle and wait for the God to provide all these things. They have to do, and when they do, Allah Almighty rewards them. So that's a beautiful combination which actually explains the concept of grace of Allah Almighty in Islam.
Ibrahim Saab, it's a concept that's not entirely separate from the Christian idea, but perhaps best seen as an extension of it.
Yes, I mean, I think I remember last year I was asked to give a talk in a church on about the month of Ramadan, and I just happened to mention when they asked me that I would come again, and I said, by the grace of God. And they were all stunned that, oh, you Muslims believe in grace? And I said, yes, we believe in grace. And I explained, elaborated. Yeah, I mean, they were, I would say, not surprised in a bad way, but very pleasantly surprised and happy to know that now that again common ground has been found between the Christian understanding of grace, which Imam Saab has profoundly explained, and Dr. Zayed has, something you don't have to make an effort for. And they were quite happy to see that in Islam we had this similar teaching. And I remember telling them that they shouldn't be surprised, because the same God which was spoken to Hazrat Isa Islam has spoken to Hazrat Prophet Muhammad. So yeah, I would not, I mean, whether they use the word an extension, but I would say proof that the same God has had mercy to all His creation.
Jazakallah.
It is an extension in the way that in Islam it has been more perfected.
Yes.
I mean, the basic thing that graciousness relates to God Almighty, Creator in whatever sense you believe. But in Islam, a very comprehensive, full concept of grace of Allah Almighty has been mentioned through these attributes.
One slight extension on that is Hazrat Masih Maud salam has again explained that the grace of God not only for animate things but for inanimate things as well. His attribute of Rabubiyyat, this encompasses animate and inanimate things. So it's a concept that is much greater than just creation that is animate in that respect.
Jazakallah. Moving on, and we have a number of questions to cover. Moving on to a question from Michael Bradley. Thank you, Michael, for your question. Michael asks, can non-Muslims go to heaven?
Well, it's a very important question, and people generally ask what will happen to that. The thing is that Allah Almighty is gracious, merciful. He forgives the sins of the people, and He has been given the guidance from the beginning of this universe. Since He created mankind, this guidance has been coming in various forms through various prophets. So Allah Almighty has always been giving some recipe for going into paradise, to become among those people who are forgiven and loved by Allah Almighty.